In today's episode of the Pathway Presents podcast, I got a very interesting guest here with me today. I'm with Mark Lerner, and he's hailing over as the head of marketing at Parative. Parative is a customer behavior platform. So if you guys wondering, what this is all about, in very simple terms, it's really about to understand how people are actually using your products. And now with the growth of product-led growth, this becomes even more important, even more relevant, right? To really understand how people are using the product and, when do they convert, upscale, upgrade, churn, or even, are ready for the next upgraded plan in your product. So today we're going to talk with Mark all about that and also how he's building out the inbound function for Parative. So Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
Of course. So maybe give people a quick overview on Parative. I gave it like a small overview, but maybe in your own words, that would be, very insightful for people. What is Parative all about?
Sure. So Parative is what we're calling a customer behavior platform. The idea came about because previously the founders of this company had a initial product that is still in the market that was a feedback tool for product managers to capture feedback about their product. So that was kind of this explicit communication between a user and the company to understand, where they're finding value, what are the greatest revenue opportunities for updating features, things like that. And there was this realization that that's really only half of the communication that's happening. There's all this other implicit communication happening through the behaviors that people have in a platform that signal things like the propensity to expand revenue or churn risk, things like that. And that's where the idea of Parative came from. And the idea is to really kind of enable people to find these signals in the noise of data. And that's the idea. So Parative has been live in kind of a beta form for about the last 3 or 4 months. And that's when I came on starting then and really kind of taking that to market and building out a marketing organization within a company, which is what I thrive in.
Makes sense. Now, what type of product do I need to have so that Parative makes the most sense for me?
Sure. Yeah, we generally work with people that have, SaaS products, so a cloud-based solution. Really not all that relevant for a company that just does services, or on-prem is a bit more complicated as well. It's really about taking that behavior that a user has in your product, combining it with the data that lives in things like the CRM or a customer success platform, and finding insights and alerts and the signals within that behavior according to the segments of customers that you're looking at, being able to take action on those signals in the tools that you're using today. So we really deeply integrate with those other go-to-market tools to enable people to take the necessary actions.
Could you give people like a couple of examples, what CRMs or customer success tools you guys integrate with, just if they're listening in, if it would work with theirs?
So generally the biggest use cases for those integrations would be CRMs like HubSpot and Salesforce, and HubSpot marketing automation as well, Pardot, Slack and Microsoft Teams for alerts, internal alerts, things like Pendo for in-app tours, Zendesk, those kinds of things, enabling the automation of alerts and actions based on the signals that you get from Parative in the tools that you're already using. That's really, we focus on that a lot, not creating another dashboard or another place people have to log into all the time, but being able to orchestrate the right actions into the tools that they're using on their, everyday basis.
And you mentioned that you're building out, the inbound function basically from the ground up. Maybe give people an overview, like, what is it then when you took on that responsibility? How do you think about that first? Like, what's what goes through your mind? What are the key cornerstones of strategic things that you want to take in place before you even start writing content?
Sure. So I recently sat down and thought about my philosophy on marketing, because I've been in this role in different places before where I was the first marketer. And I think that scares a lot of people, but it's actually the one I prefer the most because it's a blank slate and you get to build the scaffolding and you get to build the house. You're not just remodeling someone else's house. And so, the concept I came up with was this kind of 0 to 1 marketing playbook. It's, Peter Thiel has a very famous book, 0 to 1, and it's similar. but specifically for this one area, which is marketing. And the way I see it is that there's three main steps that you have to go through. And if you skip any of them, then you're not setting yourself up for success. The first one is build awareness. No one's going to sign up if they don't know who you are, and that's a process. You want to create an awareness in the marketplace that you exist. Not necessarily why your product is better, but you really want to create that awareness around you and the company being a trusted source for knowledge and insights to your target customer. So let's say your target buyer is chief revenue officer or a VP of customer success. You want to start talking about the topics that are most relevant to them and being able to develop unique insights that are interesting to them, and do that at scale, so that you're they call it flooding the zone. You want to be everywhere, right? There's this idea now about how a marketing department is essentially you're building a media organization with your company. And I love that. And that's where I'm taking this. So you build that awareness. And once you've kind of created a following and a community, you then start generating demand. You start leveraging your reach to that audience to talk about the product itself and its value and its differentiation. And then once you're able to take that step, that's when you start capturing the value from this audience that you've built. But that first step, that awareness, going from being completely unknown to being known, is the real challenge. And so we're at that stage right now, and that's the fun part for me.
Very cool. I mean, I kind of get the feeling you should write the next book called 0 to 1.
Yeah, I thought about it. We'll see. I guess call me in 18 months and we'll see if it works.
Awesome. Very good. Okay, that makes a whole lot of sense. So and then when it goes into now, probably, I mean, you can tell us a little bit, how big the team is for then the actual realization and the execution of the plans. But what do you think is then most important when it comes to taking the concepts, awareness, demand generation that you just described, to getting it to into execution? Is there something that you've learned now in that period that you think is very good, important?
Yes. So I would say there's this idea that at the early stage, do the things that are not scalable and then figure out how to scale them and not be afraid to do that. Today I'm the only marketer. We have a team of SDRs. We're very cross-functional. So I work directly with our head of sales, our founder, our product team. So it's a very kind of flat group. And I think in a stage that we're at, so when you're the first marketer at a company that's just kind of scaling, you have to be comfortable wearing as many hats and going outside your comfort zone, to really anywhere, because you're not necessarily going to have all the resources at your disposal, and you're just going to need to get it done and figure out how. And so there are ways to do it with not as much resources. So one of the big things on the content side is being able to repurpose, right? So you have content that exists in your blog, pull a few of them together, create an ebook out of that, do interviews, right? Transcribe them and turn them into blog posts. Things repurpose, never only use something once. One of the useful things about the role I'm in now is that there was a bunch of blog content that lived on the blog of the company before it rebranded. And I was able to take a whole bunch of those posts that have some pretty good SEO at this point, and bulk them up, make them a little more relevant to the our current target market. And a much shorter period of time than it would have taken normally, we're starting to gain SEO traction. I think it sounds crazy, but our search traffic was up like 800% last week. And we just launched the blog because I was able to do some redirecting and then bulking up of those posts and fixing up some backlinks, doing some hacking there. And that's a great way to kind of turbocharge just getting started. And those are the things that you have to do. You got to figure out the little hacks and then figure out ways to scale them. And that's the exciting stuff.
Very cool. Well, I was being serious with the book. We got a lot of people on the show that are in that position. So I'm sure a lot of people need a lot of guidance in that position. Very, very cool. Now, I would like to switch gears a little bit. We talked about the company. We talked about a bit of the concept of 0 to 1 marketing. Now, I want to wrap it up with some rapid fire questions for you. Are you ready for those?
As ready as I'll ever be, I guess. Let's find out.
Awesome. Very good. What is the last book that you read or the last podcast you listened to?
The last podcast I listened to was, I believe, an interview with Patrick Campbell from Profitwell on the SaaS podcast, which is a favorite of mine.
Mm-hmm. What is the one single thing that your company is focused on the most at the moment?
Positioning.
Mm-hmm.
We're really focused on taking this broad idea of the customer behavior and finding where it can capture the most value, provide the most value to the end customer. Where we see that today is on expansion revenue and churn risk, because the market is, difficult at the moment. We see a huge opportunity for companies trying to, customer acquisition is going to get harder. It is getting harder. And the opportunity for revenue growth exists within their current customer base. And we are really well placed to help them increase that. And so our positioning and focus on how we message that has really been focused on that.
Yeah, we had a lot of PQL marketers on the show who actually talked about the PQL metric, a product qualified lead. That's probably another use case that
it is a use case. It is definitely a use case. And I think that, the term PQL is kind of everywhere right now. And I often find that companies that aren't necessarily PLG, when you bring up that term, it turns them off, like, oh, well, you don't have a free trial, therefore that's not relevant. It's not really true, because any company that has tiered pricing in which your goal is to grow, upsell, cross-sell, whatever, the behavior of somebody in the product is what's telling you that they have a propensity to expand. And so, the terminology of PQL, I think sometimes turns people off. Whereas if you were to say something like expansion opportunity, that might capture their attention a little bit more. But in essence, we're talking about a very similar concept.
Yeah, makes complete sense. And I really appreciate you taking that apart, because, if you haven't as often thought about it as you, it might be difficult to actually take apart those nuances. So no, really good. A very last question. If today would be if we do a bit of time travel, right? We go back to, and actually one last thing that I nearly skipped the question here. If you would have a magic wand, what's the one thing that you would fix as a marketer today for your role in marketing?
Jeez. If I had a magic wand and I had one thing that I could fix, I think I would, if I could triple or quadruple my content output somehow, that would be what what I'd want. I have so many ideas and so many, on my screen over here, list of content I want to get done. And then when I start writing it, it takes me much longer than I wanted it to. But that's because the topic is great, but if you're just writing a regurgitation of other things other people have said, then it's not valuable. And so I end up having to put a lot of time into it, or more time than I wanted to, but it needs to be good. So
makes sense. And for the very last question, if we go back to Florida Atlantic University School of Business, right? You're heading out of formal education into the world of business and growth. What's the one advice you would give yourself for your journey?
Forget everything you learned. It's interesting. I had a conversation with somebody on LinkedIn this afternoon, in which I described, my hope that, marketing programs in grad schools have caught up, because what I learned through my undergrad and graduate experience was based on a world of business that doesn't exist anymore. They were talking about, in-store retail, and nobody, there was no discussion of even social media or email marketing at that time. And so everything was SWOT analysis and 4Ps and all these things, all these concepts that I haven't once had to really apply. And so it's nice to have the 3 letters at the end of my name, Mark Lerner, MBA. But in reality, I spent more time unlearning that and having to learn new things. And so that's what I would tell myself.
Makes a whole lot of sense. Mark, I really appreciate you took the time with us today to be a guest on Pathmark Presents. I want to give you the very last word. If somebody would be forgetting all that we discussed about Parative today, what's the one thing people should remember?
That your biggest growth opportunity for revenue today lives within your existing customers. There is a lot of scary stuff out there right now about recession or not recession. That whatever word you use, things are different than they were before. But that's not necessarily mean that you have to, it's not a catastrophe. There is a huge opportunity that is untapped. It's a low-hanging fruit, and that's why Parative is what it is.
Thanks a lot for being a guest on Pathmark Presents.
Thank you.